Good evening. Thank you for being here. I know it's Wednesday night, and I know that we're in the middle of a very busy season, so I'm grateful for your attendance, and I'm grateful for you being here. I want to start with just a quick couple of things about me and who I am so that you have some idea who it is that's talking to you this evening. My name is Ryan Smith. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I'm currently a family life minister at a church in Rockwell. I am with you this evening because my area of expertise and my area of research is technology and family functioning. I wrote my dissertation on the effects of Facebook on marriage. And I'll give you a spoiler alert, it wasn't great. It was an interesting study, and it opened my eyes quite a bit to the impact that our technology has on us. For me as a clinician, this is a subject I'm passionate about, not because I was looking for a niche. To be honest with you, I don't like having to have this conversation as often as I have to have it. The reason that I'm passionate about this is because this is probably, in my clinical opinion, the biggest issue that families are dealing with in our current culture, and that's the infiltration of digital technology on our day-to-day functioning and on our family functioning, and I think the little moments that it strips away from us. The board you see behind you, the slide you see behind you, has a bunch of stuff about my professional background. If you're interested in that, you can go ahead and tune me out for a minute, and you can read it. But let me say this. The most important thing on that slide are the two little faces at the bottom of the picture. Those are my boys. My boys are 8 and 4 years old, and I can see in them the impact that screen time has on them. Show of hands if you have in your world little ones about that same age. Okay, we're going to talk a lot about the impact on their world. We're going to talk a lot about the impact on those ones that are a little bit older, and instead of big cheesy grins, they have kind of morbid scowls. We're going to talk about them, and we're also going to talk about later in life issues that you may be surprised that we're going to discuss. But I wanted you to see more than my resume. I wanted you to see my family, because I wanted you to know that my presentations are all rooted in my experiences as a father as much as they're rooted in my experiences as a clinician. So we're going to talk about some things tonight that I think might hit a chord with you. I promise you, at some point in the next 45 minutes or so, you're going to hear me say something that's going to make you feel like a terrible parent. You're going to hear me say something that's going to make you question every decision you've ever made. Stay with me. I offer a lot of grace for parents in this situation. I want to start, before we get into the content tonight, I want to start by quickly reading the end of Proverbs 4. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Keep your mouth free of perversity, keep corrupt talk from your lips. Let your eyes look straight ahead, fix your gaze directly before you. Give careful thought to the paths for your feet, and be steadfast in all your ways. Do not turn to the right or the left. Keep your foot from evil. It is harder and harder to do that in a world where we have access to the breadth of human knowledge at our fingertips. And generally, rather than accessing the breadth of human knowledge at our fingertips, we access ways to yell at each other. And we access ways to distract ourselves from our wives and distract ourselves from our husbands. I say that with a great deal of compassion tonight. I want you to know that I recognize that parenting is really, really hard, and I'm not going to be super hard on you. So if you feel in the next few minutes as though I'm talking a little too directly to you, take a deep breath and keep in mind everyone in this room has had these moments. By the way, my favorite one of these is the one on the right. I don't want to brag, but my 3-year-old is slamming doors in my face at an 8th grade level. I reckon you can probably relate to the idea that parenting is really hard. I also want to give you, just so you've got access to it, I wanted to give you access to the information that you're going to get tonight. You don't have to write furiously. If you would like to take pictures of slides, go ahead. But this website, yourbestfamily.com, is my website. You can access all of the information you're going to get tonight on that website. And I want to say this clearly. There is nothing on that website that is for sale. There's never going to be a credit card information I'm asking from you. This is a ministry that is meant to serve as a support to this. Okay, so I'm not looking for customers on that website. I'm simply looking for a way to stay in touch with you and a way to give you updated, accessible information. So that is what you see in front of you. You will find on that website, you'll find some articles, things you need to look out for. If you are here tonight because you want to know which apps your kids are accessing, that you need to go home and like punish everybody in the house because there's this particular app on their phone, we're not going to do a lot of that tonight. And the reason we're not going to do that tonight is because if that were the gist of this presentation, I would need to be back every 6 months. While that might be a sound business model for me, it's going to be really frustrating for you. So we're not going to talk a lot about which specific apps to watch out for. We'll mention a few, but I won't go too deep down that road because I don't want to spend a lot of time doing something that's going to be outdated in a couple of months. But you will see some reviews. You'll see some product information that you can access that will allow you to get a better handle on some of the things that we're experiencing. I also want you to know tonight that it's not the technology. It's not a technology problem, it's an us problem. Now, here's why that's really important. I have a lot of people in this room who are intimidated by this technology. You don't understand it. Your kids can access it way better than you can. Your 4-year-olds can navigate iPads better than you. They know how to access, they know Wi-Fi passwords that you have no idea how they got hold of. Your children can do things that you have no clue who taught them. And as a result, a lot of us parents kind of stick our heads in the sand because we're intimidated by it. Because I don't understand what they're doing. Here's what I want to empower you to walk away from tonight with. It is not a technology problem, it is a human problem. You know relationships. You know human interaction. You know the dialogue that needs to exist between two human beings. So the problems you're encountering are not technology problems. The problems are us problems, and you are experts in that. So if you have ever backed down from a conversation with your kids because they get into some kind of tech world that you don't understand, I want to encourage you tonight to get beyond that and to recognize that the problems that exist are human problems, and you know how to address those. The other thing I want you to know is that technology is awesome, and I'm not here to take it. Okay? It's possible at a certain point tonight, you will hear me describing the intricacies of technology in our family, and you will think, we're going home, we're throwing them all in a lake, we're digging a hole, and we're going to hide in it. While I'm sensitive to that mentality, I'm sensitive to that mindset, that is not my goal tonight. My goal is not to rid you of your technology. My goal is to help you do it in a more effective way. So let's get into the content. I forgot to ask, what time do we normally finish?
We said 7:15.
We said 7:15. Okay, great. I heard 7:30. Let's keep going. I'm kidding. I'll be respectful of that. So I wanted to start tonight by reiterating that we're going to cover the entire lifespan. The reason we're going to cover the lifespan is because, as you'll hear me describe in just about 20 minutes, this is not just a kid problem, this is a human problem, and it's one that we need to be willing to address. So I want to start with some science, okay? I want to start with some biology, I want to start with some numbers that might scare you, but if you will stay with me, I think you'll see that we can use these numbers to our advantage. There's some things built into our design. There's some things that are built into the way that God created our brains and created our neurological functioning that we need to be aware of as we're getting into technology. So let's talk about what happens when we introduce technology to developing brains. First of all, that is the cutest child on the planet, right? That's my youngest, with an Oreo on his head. By the way, he's super adorable and he knows it and he uses it to his advantage all the time, especially when he's in trouble with his mom. It's weird how that works. So some numbers that I want to give you, the first of which is going to scare you to death, so wait for the second one. Digital stimulation. So we've been doing research on preschool-aged children and the neurobiological implications of technological function. Okay, so let me say that in a real simple language. We know now what happens to their brains when they stare at iPads all day. Here's what happens. For digital stimulation is iPads, phones, TVs. Ooh, that one's hard. TVs count. Digital stimulation is stimulation in which a child is looking at a screen and not looking at a human being. Pop quiz. Anybody want to guess the age in which children begin daily screen interaction?
6 months.
Almost 4 months. It's 4 months. At 4 months old, we're shoving phones in their faces. And by the way, it's us doing that. You know, a 4-month-old is not sneaking off and grabbing a device and putting it in their diaper and waddling back into their crib. A 4-month-old is in a crib, and we as parents are pulling up videos largely because when we're sitting with them, we've got our phones out. So, oh, look, they're staring at them like a hypnotic trance, and so we use that to our advantage. So 4 months old, for every hour per day that a preschool-age kid, so these are kids between 4 months, which is when the research really starts, 4 months to 5 years, so before kindergarten starts. For every hour per day that a child in that age group engages in digital stimulation, it is correlated to a 10% increase in the likelihood of ADHD diagnosis within the first 2 years of school. So some of you are thinking, okay, so I've upped it by 87%. This is going to be hard. Some of you are doing the math and thinking, can you do 180%? Is that possible? I understand that this number is scary. Here's what I'm going to explain why this number is what this number is in just a moment, but this number is really important. For every hour per day, 10% increase in the likelihood for later attention problems. Here's the good news. That's not the only piece of information we have. It's not the only piece of data we have. There's another piece of data we also have. The other piece of data is for cognitive stimulation. So cognitive stimulation is, I go outside and I build something. I go outside and I swing on a swing. Remember swings? Swings, I play sticks. I wrestle with a friend. I do the things that children do. By the way, cognitive stimulation is literally anything that's not a swing. So they can be coloring at the table. They can be doing Legos. My 8-year-old loves Legos. He also loves to leave them in places where I don't see them until I step on them. Legos, those are cognitive stimulants. For every hour per day that a child engages in cognitive stimulation, it's correlated to a 30% decrease in that same likelihood. Okay, so what does that mean? That means if your kid is looking at an iPad for a couple hours a day, doesn't mean you're a terrible parent, and it doesn't mean that they're absolutely, you might as well start the wriggle and drip now. It means that you need to be really intentional about putting cognitive stimulation in their life. Now here's why that's important. If you are the parent of a young kid, there's something unique about you. You're the first generation of parents who have to make your kids go outside. You are the first generation of parents who have to tell your kids, you need to do something creative. You're the first generation of parents who said to put your kid in the playroom, slam the door, and hope for the best. You're the first generation of parents that have to do that. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands because I don't want to go too far down nostalgia lane, but how many of you had to be called in from being outside almost every day? How many of you had to be called in when it was dinner time and you couldn't wait to get back outside? How many of you knew the intricate details of every single house in the neighborhood? You knew what the bathrooms looked like, you knew where everyone's room was, you knew who lived where, and you had all kinds of weird stories that you shouldn't have had. But you had all those because you were out in the neighborhood, you were out with your friends, you had a social life at 7, 8, 9, 10. That's cognitive stimulation. You learned a bunch of things. You learned how to deal with other human beings. You learned social navigation. You learned how to communicate with people in a high-stakes environment. Because if you said something that got a negative reaction, you got to see it. And you had to watch as that person's negative reaction then had consequences. Those were lessons that we can't replicate in a digital world. Increasingly, if you ask kids what they would like to do in their free time, for the record, if you've got young kids, test me on this. Go home tonight and say, hey, if tomorrow there were no rules and you could do anything you want, what would you want to do all day? The answer for most kids will be video games. The answer for most kids will be an iPad. I want to give you a little piece of irony about my own life. I do digital research and technological research, and I do research on social media and relationship functioning. Not coincidentally, I live in the middle of nowhere, and we don't have internet access at my house. And now there's a funny part about that I want to mention. We live on acreage. We have acres of trails, we have horses, we have goats, we have chickens, we have dogs. We live in a little nature paradise. It's in Rockwall, it's not on another planet. We live in Rockwall. But we live out in the middle of nowhere with all these animals, right? My boys, if given the choice of going outside and being Huck Finn, which they could be at our house, they would rather be inside playing Marvel Avengers on their Xbox. So even with access to this amazing wonderland of stuff, they're boys. They would rather be inside playing video games. That is the power and the draw of this digital stimulation. All right, so we've got the numbers between digital stimulation and cognitive stimulation. I want to explain why. There's a reason that this type of stimulation leads to ADHD. That is my oldest and his favorite chicken. His chicken's name is Nugget. Well, Nugget and Noodle are his two favorite chickens. Nugget may or may not have gotten snatched by a bobcat, and there's a replacement Nugget in the coop right now. And if it tells him, I'm going to be very upset. So that's Stockton and Nugget. Here's why. Here's why kids that are exposed to digital stimulation at an early age, here's why we see in them an increased likelihood for ADHD. You can read the technical version of it up on that screen. Here's the simple version. Their iPad moves faster than the real world. And so what we're doing is we're conditioning inside kids' brains the expectation that the world will keep up with the pacing that an iPad creates. And so they get really frustrated. I worked for years. Part of my resume that I didn't mention yet, I worked for 13 years in the public school system. My last job in the public school system was as a family support counselor. I started a clinic in Mesquite, and what we did was family therapy for elementary age behavior issues. So those of you who work on elementary campuses will be able to relate to this. Elementary kids would do things that would get them sent to alternative school. As a part of that process, their parents would come to me, and we would do family therapy to try to resolve some of those issues. I say that because I was in a lot of kindergarten classrooms over the last few years. We have a lot of ADHD diagnoses. We have a lot of kids who are medicated for that. You know what my clinical assessment is of watching this unfold in the classroom? We have a generation of young kids who want to swipe off their kindergarten teachers and they can't. They're used to that. They're used to being able to rapid content, rapid change. Give a kid an iPad and watch how fast he changes what he's doing. When he doesn't like the show he's watching, swipe it, next thing. When he doesn't like the music he's listening to, swipe it, next thing. When he doesn't like the game, close it, next thing. And then he gets into a kindergarten class and they put a piece of paper in front of him and tell him to do something with it. I don't want to do that. Swipe. It won't swipe. And now I'm in trouble. Because my behavior looks like ADHD, when in reality it's high expectations for rapid stimulation. Okay? And if you haven't thought about that, let me give you another thing that might help you. You remember Saturday morning cartoons that don't exist anymore, which is devastating to me? Remember Saturday morning cartoons? There was one rule for Saturday morning cartoons. What was it? You better be there. How many of you set your alarm to get up to watch a show? I absolutely did, and I know I'm not alone. You better raise your hand. So I say that because Saturday morning cartoons, you had to be there. Do you remember the conflict during the commercial? I can run to the bathroom or I can get a snack. I can't do both. I got to see what happens next. So you have to figure out what you're going to do next. You got to negotiate that real world situation. Do you remember when a new album came out? Do you remember having to go to Tower Records and actually pay money out of your pocket for the whole CD? Do you remember that? Do you remember these moments in our childhood where, do you remember, okay, mixtapes?
Yeah.
All right, I got some guys in the room, you made some mixtapes. You made some mixtapes in middle school and high school, right? Or elementary school, or whenever it was you were trying to get girls to pay attention to you. Do you remember the process of creating a mixtape? You sit and wait for the Mike and Mechanic song that you were looking for. And you sit, I appreciate somebody laughing at that. So, you'd sit and wait for that song for hours. And you get in trouble 4 or 5 times, you get grounded for the weekend, but you're going to get that song. And then the DJ would be talking, you'd be like, stop talking, I got to push record! And you push record, and then at the end of the tape, you record your voice. Baby, I stayed up until 2 a.m. And I know you wanted that song, and so I got it for you. All right, so here's what those moments. And those moments are beautiful. Yes, I did that, absolutely. I can tell you her name, too. So I remember making mixtapes. I remember when the season did. I'm not telling you these stories, by the way, so that we can all laugh at how ridiculous we were, although you should. I'm telling you those stories because you know what every single one of those experiences taught you? The world doesn't revolve around you. Every one of those instances taught you that you had to adapt. They taught you that you had to exercise patience. They taught you delayed gratification. Delayed gratification is the ability to hunt for that Mike and the Mechanic song, decide which radio station was most likely to come on, and then wait for it. And then when you got it, you record it. And if you were in that situation, that feeling of elation that came over you when you finally got that song you've been waiting for, that was the moment of recognition. It was the what? It wasn't at the end. Oh yeah, no, if that happened, that was a failure to prepare. That was a lesson learned. So to me, those moments, if you think back through them in our childhood, those moments taught us a lot of lessons about delayed gratification. They taught us a lot of lessons about control. Those moments prepared you to go sit in a classroom and be given assignments that you weren't pumped about and then do. They gave you the ability to look at a Friday night and to recognize that to get to that Friday night with freedom, I have to do some stuff between Monday and Thursday. I have to take care of my business so that my parents feel like I can be trusted on Friday night. Now, let me ask you a question. How many of your kids have to wait for the content they desire? Music, instant. Movies, instant. Shows, instant. Games, instant. Having to wait because of a slow internet connection is torture. It is the end of their little human world. My oldest is into Imagine Dragons. He found the first song and within 20 minutes had everything they'd ever done on a playlist, which I then got to sift through for the next 12 hours, reading all the lyrics. But I say that because those moments are gone. We've removed them from childhood. So if you're parenting a young child, let me encourage you in this regard. The personality trait that is most closely tied to your kid's success is the ability to delay gratification. As parents and as please put those moments in your kid's life. Please put moments where they have to work for stuff. If your kid's in trouble, don't ground them for a week. Don't ground them for a day. Don't ground them for 2 days. Ground them until they have completed the number of tasks that you put in front of them. Give them a to-do list. Say, you're in trouble. Now I want you to work your way out. But you have to accomplish all of these things on your own. That gives them the ability to delay gratification. It gives them the ability to work their way out of trouble. If your kid is in trouble at your house, I don't want you to have to go into jailer mode, where you have to, by the way, be the jailer for a little martyr that's walking around the house moaning about how you've taken away their stuff. I would much rather you put in place some things and say, give me these 10 or 12 things. And when I see these 10 or 12 things, you can have your stuff back. And by the way, number 2 on the list is, you can't mention your phone for 48 hours. Okay, that one's going to work. It's a little tricky, but that one's going to work. All right. I weirdly got sidetracked. So let's keep going. So let's talk about childhood to adolescence. I'm going to mention for just a second adolescent neurobiology. I know that sounds super boring. I'm going to talk to you about the brain development of teenagers. And I know for some of you, you may be thinking, that's it. I knew I shouldn't have come. And you're looking at your wife saying, you dragged me here. And now he's about to start talking about neuroscience. Stay like 5 minutes. Stay right there. Here's the deal with adolescent neurobiology. I only really need you to know 2 things. They are a part of our design, and they're amazing. And the 2 things that I need you to know will change the way you view technology intervention with kids. And it'll also change the way you view it, hopefully, within your own life as well. So thing number 1 that I need you to know is about the prefrontal cortex. That's that part that's lit up. The prefrontal cortex handles all of that upper level stuff. So it handles empathy, it handles morality, complex decision making, the ability to process information on your environment and then to make an appropriate choice based on that information. It was my prefrontal cortex that tells me, that reads the room and helps me figure out how best to respond to you. That's my prefrontal cortex doing those things. It is your prefrontal cortex that prevents you from screaming in the middle of a quiet library. Because you can gauge the context, and your prefrontal cortex tells you how to behave and how not to behave. Which, by the way, is why 2-year-olds throw fits, because that prefrontal cortex has not been developed. It's mushy, it's barely there at all. And so as they're going through the developmental stages, they have to learn these things. So it handles all of these things. Here's what I need parents and grandparents of teenagers to know. Every teenager on the planet is struggling with everything on that slide. They're struggling with empathy, they're struggling with morality, they're struggling with decision making, they're struggling with future planning, they're struggling with their ability to inhibit inappropriate behavior. Okay, here's what, even the good ones, even the ones you trust, even if you've got a kid at home, and I hope you do, you got a kid at home and you think, okay, yeah, my kid's amazing. She's wonderful, she tells me the truth, I trust her, I know who she is. I'm not saying that that's not true. That's all great and wonderful, and if that's true, fantastic. But she's still struggling with this stuff on some level. Okay, now hopefully it's on a functional level and you don't see problems with it, but she's still struggling with it. So I need you to know that if I took the cultural aspects away, so if I took the cultural expectations out of it, if I just showed you this list and I said, I got a kid who's 15 and this stuff is a mess, should I give this kid a smartphone? Most of us would say, of course not. That would be crazy, but there's a culture that we live in. The culture that we live in says 15, oh, they've got smartphones by 15. We'll get to that in a minute. All right, so I want you to know the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. The reason that prefrontal cortex development is a problem is because in prefrontal cortex development, what we see is poor decision making tied to the inability to do all the stuff that was on that previous slide. Okay? The other thing I need you to know, and I'm moving quickly through this part because I could spend an hour and a half talking neurobiology. I'm only going to spend about 5 minutes. The other thing I need you to know is dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter in your brain. It's kind of the elementary school definition. If there are doctors in the room, I'm going to give a very basic, I'm not going to talk controlled dopamine and desired dopamine. We're just going to talk basic elementary school. Dopamine is the thing that makes us want stuff. See, not super clinical. Dopamine is the chemical that drives our behavior. It's the chemical that prompts us to move towards things that we want. It's the chemical that gives us a payoff when we accomplish things. Adolescence can largely be described as a chase for dopamine. It is all about finding sources of dopamine. It's all about finding sources of dopaminergic reactions. Okay, now that's really important for us to understand as adults. And here's why that is really important for us to understand. Dopamine in an adolescent brain is completely different than it is in the adult brain. Now the function is the same, but the volume is different. Let me explain what I mean. In an adolescent brain, the pathway for this little neurotransmitter is physically wider. So for us as adults, our dopamine pathways look like creeks running through our brains. In an adolescent child, dopamine pathway looks like rivers. They're physically wider, which explains all of the ridiculous behavior that you see in teenage boys. Their behavior is a drive for dopamine, and so they engage in dangerous, novel, kind of bizarre, always risky behavior because there's a dopaminergic payoff. Which, by the way, and I'm going to try to give you a bunch of little small stuff throughout this presentation. If you are parenting a teenager, and that teenager does something that flies in the face of everything you've ever taught them, and you wonder, how did this happen? They haven't heard a word I've ever said. My advice to you would be, first of all, they have heard you. It just hasn't stuck yet. They haven't begun acting it out yet, so don't be so hard on yourself as parents. And the second thing I would tell you is, don't ask your kid what they were thinking. That's a bad question. That's our go-to. Our go-to is, what were you thinking? How in the world did you make that decision? That's a bad question for teenagers. You know what a great decision is? Tell me what the payoff was. It sounds a little weird, and at first they'll think you're trying to trick them into saying something. But help them understand you're looking for payoff. The payoff is dopamine. Dopamine hit because there was a girl watching, and I was trying to impress a girl. There was a dopamine payoff because when I got into the argument with the teacher and I said the thing that got me in trouble, everybody was watching, and so I was kind of popular. That's a dopamine hit. Okay, so asking them what the payoff was for their behavior might help you actually understand why they did the things that they did. But dopamine is important because when we find a source for dopamine, we'll come back to it. When we find a repetitive source for dopamine hits, we will come back to it. So, if adolescence is basically a pathway, or is an experience where we try to chase dopamine, that's what our lives are about in the adolescent years. There's a reality about dopamine that applies to technology. This is what I wanted you to know. There is nothing in the real world. There is truly and sincerely nothing in the real world that can create a dopamine hit the way technology can. Now, here's why that's important. A kid who spends all day with 6-7 hours of screen time, which is not crazy. 6 or 7 hours, I've worked with some who have a lot more than that. A kid who gets 6 or 7 hours of screen time is getting 6 or 7 hours of repetitive dopamine hits, and the real world can't keep up. So let's average out their screen time dopamine. Let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, they're getting an 8. They get used to that, right? Then they step out of their digital world, and dopamine plummets. Talking to you is like a 4. Talking to their friends is like a 6. It's better than a 4, but it's still just a 6. You know what that means, those dopamine numbers? They're not as happy in the real world if they're on their technology longer. The longer they spend on their devices, the less happy they are in the real world. I'll give you an example of how this looks. For the record, I'm not going to use a teenager. I'm going to use a mom. I work with adults. This same rule applies to us as well. The more time you spend engaged in your Facebook feed, the less happy you are with your husband. The less happy you are with your life, because people look at each other now. You should have brought your side guards. All right, there we go. The more time you spend looking at each other, the more time you spend looking at your Facebook feed, the less happy you are with the individual in the room. Now, here's an example of what I'm talking about. I worked a few years ago with a mom who, in the privacy of a counselor's office, confessed to me that she did not enjoy spending time with her elementary-age kids. There were 2 kids, and she gave me an example that broke her heart. She said, I was in the living room, and they came to me, and they said, Mommy, come outside, we're going to build a tent. And so they went outside, and she sat down and kind of engaged in the activity. And what she confessed to me was, she said, it was the most boring thing I could imagine doing. I had no fun at all, and I could not wait to go back inside. And she was devastated. She was crying. This was not something where she was trying to excuse that behavior. She was in counseling because she felt terrible about it. And so she asked me, she said, what's wrong with me? My question was simple. I said, what were you doing when they came to get you? I was in the living room. No, what were you doing when they came to get you? I was in a chair. I was on my phone. I said, what were you doing? I was on Facebook. I said, can I ask what you were doing on Facebook? Well, it was on one of my posts, and I had posted something, and it had got a bunch of likes, and I was having a conversation with somebody. Every like, every interaction, every little emoji that goes with a picture, dopamine. Kids show up, let's go outside, dopamine tanked for a mother. And so when she went outside to engage with her kids, they couldn't compete with the Facebook feed. And so as we started talking about this, what became evident was that every moment where she felt disconnected from her kids, and every moment she felt disconnected from her husband, were moments that she was engaged in digital stuff. All right, so I say that because if you're not cognizant of the impact that your technology has on your day-to-day functioning, I hope you take that lesson home with you. All right, all of these little apps are all things that I want parents to be aware of because all of them work the same way. They're all meant to keep you there. And so all of these apps create a dopamine release that causes you to go back to them and back to them and back to them. And I've got people who are really confused about like 3 of them. What is that? No, TikTok. That was okay, right? No, it's not. So TikTok sounds great because you can make music videos and post them and like you can do innocent kid stuff. Yes, but so can everyone else, and they don't necessarily filter their content or filter the videos in which they post. And if your kid is scrolling through TikTok, T-minus 3 minutes before they see nudity. T-minus 2 minutes before they see lyrics that they can't unhear. So TikTok is one of those that has, nice innocent application that is not generally used that way. But all of these are meant to do the same thing. They're all meant to create a dopaminergic release. Now, by the way, they're not all terrible. Snapchat, which is the one that most kids get in trouble with. My kid loves Snapchat because the only person he snaps with is my brother who lives in Seattle. So as far as my kids are concerned, that's the Uncle Gay bag. So if you use these things in a positive way, use these things in a healthy way, they don't have to be the worst thing in the world, but they all do have that reaction in terms of dopamine. By the way, I just want to put this on here. If you run into apps that you don't understand, I'm going to give you a tool at the end of this presentation for how to figure out what they do. But before I do, there's 2 questions I want you to ask your kid if you see something you don't get. 1, what does this do? And by the way, that question you need to verify. So whenever you ask the kid what the app does, but verify that. And then number 2, how do you use it? And you will notice U is in bold. And the reason U is in bold, if you ask a 16-year-old kid, hey, how do you use this app? They will go into marketing mode. Well, it's interesting you should ask. You can connect with people from all over the world, and you can encourage each other in a number of ways. And they'll start talking to you as though this is just the most profound, wonderful app in the world. No. I get how you can use it, but how do you use it? Let me see your feed. Let me see the last 10 messages you've sent. And for the record, you're going to hear me say in the next few minutes repeatedly, digital privacy, stakes are too high. Open their phones, go through them. Kids don't need devices in their room at night under any circumstances. If they live in your house, devices shouldn't be in their room at night. All right, now that we only needed half of you, let's keep going. Let's talk about how social media affects children. In terms of young kids, and I got a few things I want to touch on before we get to the good news. I told you I'm going to devastate you first, and then I'll build you back up. So the research that we have on social media in kids, increased feelings of comparison and jealousy in kids as young as 10. It does not, I wanted you to see this slide for this reason. Social media is not age specific. Little kids who look at other people's stuff. Have you ever had a 5, 6, 7-year-old kid turn a camera over on their phone and say, hey guys, as though they're talking to 1,000 YouTube followers? Mine does it all the time. We try to limit his time on devices at all, but even he knows that, okay, a YouTuber is a thing. And it creates increased feelings of jealousy. It creates increased feelings of conflict. The last thing I wanted you to see on this one was this one right here. So point number 3 on this slide, participants who possess social media accounts are 40% less likely to confide in human beings. School districts are so desperate to try to keep up with that, and we wanted to meet them where they are. So we were sending, let's do augmented reality, let's do the flipped classroom model, where teachers can give digital content for the house, and they'll come home and we'll do the cognitive stuff. So we push. This data just started making its way into the normal part of our dialogue in the last 5 years. I did a presentation, the first time I ever did cognitive research in social media functioning on brain development was 2011, and they thought I was crazy. The response I got was a lot of weird looks, a lot of weird questions. But the data was already starting to trickle out at that point. So school districts are far behind. I defend them because I know they're doing the best they can. They now have millions of dollars invested into the tech and invested into the departments that maintain it. So you've got tech facilitators, you've got IT departments, you've got all these different layers. To scale back the tech, now that we've gotten to a place right now, would be very, very difficult. And would be a recognition that we went too far down this road. And I've yet to encounter a school district with the courage to say that. They know it, but I've yet to encounter a school district who's had the courage to say that. And for the record, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. On Monday, I'm going to spend the entire day on Monday. We're doing an entire staff development training for all of the counselors of McKinney ISD. Nothing I'm saying right now are things I think I'm speaking too far out of turn when I say that.
It's about time to go get kids. Tom had a question. I saw his hand.
Great.
You can answer it quick.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's not so much a question, just a comment. We, at home, before we got our daughter's phone, my wife was adamant, it's called Disney Circle.
Yeah.
It's a way to filter and monitor each and every
Oh,
one
great.
gadget, and then you can set time limits.
Disney Circle.
Disney Circle, it's something
Great.
that you connect to your home router where you can set time limits, and
Awesome.
then you can monitor it.
Turn everything off?
Yeah, they would just stop
It
working.
doesn't work from 9 to 11, or from
Oh,
11 to
great.
5 every day,
Yeah.
and the time's all shut off. so-
And it filters content, and then we can see the content that they're using and kind of.
That's awesome. That's great. I'm going to check that out. Like, you know what's funny? That type of innovation, to me, is evidence that we're moving in a good direction. So, and I know this is going to sound odd. So you asked me about school districts a few minutes ago. I have an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old. I'm less worried about their digital future than I am 18 and 14-year-olds right now. The reason for that is because they grew up in the digital Wild West. We had no idea that we needed to be thinking about these things. There has never been a day in my 8-year-old's life where I wasn't acutely aware of what he was doing digitally. At some point, they will despise the fact that I do this for a living. When they were as young as I guess my 8-year-old was probably 4 or 5 when he started kind of delving into the tech world a little bit, and he was doing it with I sat right next to him. We did all of it together. And I don't think most 18-year-olds have that opportunity because their parents, we didn't know any of this. And so we just wanted to know, they love it. If they love it, great. It'll keep them busy so we can do stuff, which I'm sensitive to. I really am. You know, I've done the same thing. But I'm less worried. It took us 80 years after we invented cars to invent seatbelts. 80 years of just, I don't know, hang on. It took 80 years, of us having to do the mom sidebar. 80 years of that before we put seatbelts on. Tech, it was about 5 or 6 before we started actually thinking, okay, hang on, we need to do something different. But I think that's where we are now. So that's a good one.
One last quick thing. We have a group from the Daughters of the King that during the presentation tonight have been praying for you as parents and praying for your kids and for their technology, which was an awesome thing, and reminded me to say, actually, you need to be praying for this stuff. This is that's a huge part of our faith lives. It needs to be a part of your prayer life. So please make that happen as well. Thank you, Dr. Smith.